In what was called the golden age of freak shows, for many freaks, the circus wasn't just a job, it was home. A place where they weren't just accepted, but admired, and often earned a living. But that wasn't the case for everyone. Some were pushed into the spotlight by desperate parents or forced in by poverty itself. Others were called oddities before they could even speak up for themselves. And in this video, we'll show you the weirdies ones that actually existed. Number 15. The mysterious human skeleton. Walter P. Cole, known as the human skeleton, was a mystery that fascinated doctors and horrified audiences. At 18, he weighed a healthy 175 pounds. But something began to consume him, some unknown condition that stripped his body of all fat and muscle. By the time he died, he weighed only 49 pounds. There was no illness ever confirmed. Instead, sideshow promoters built stories around him, that he starved himself, or that he was cursed. But Walter was no monster. He was a man trying to live off what little the world gave him. His fragile frame made him a sensation under the circus lights, and he even appeared in the silent film The Unholy Three. On stage, he stood like a ghost, both terrifying and tragic. Nobody ever learned what caused his wasting or what ended his life. All that's certain is that Walter Cole embodied what the sideshow always sold, human fragility turned into spectacle. Number 14. Israel Bressner. Israel didn't look thin. He looked like he'd been erased. At 7 feet tall and just 90 pounds, he moved like a shadow stretched across a wall. People called him Slim the Shadow, and once you saw him, the name stuck. He worked with Ringling Brothers, not just for shock value, but because people couldn't stop staring. The usual reaction wasn't laughter or applause. It was a pause, a silence, the kind that comes from seeing something your brain doesn't know how to place. For 16 years, his weight didn't change. Doctors were baffled. He wasn't starving, but nothing ever stayed on him. His limbs looked like coat hangers wrapped in skin, and when he stood next to other performers, he made the tallest of them look short. Israel didn't exaggerate his body. He didn't need to. His presence was surreal enough, and though few remember his name today, those who saw him never forgot the shape he left behind. Number 13. George Lippert. George didn't want to be called a freak. He was born in Germany, the same as his 6 siblings, a normal family, normal parents. But George had 3 legs, 2 fully formed, 1 small and stiff, attached near the right hip. He couldn't walk with it, but it was clearly there. Later in life, doctors found he also had 2 hearts. They weren't sure how, but both pumped blood until one stopped. The weird part is that he lived 2 more weeks with the second heart dead inside his chest. George spent much of his adult life performing in circuses. He didn't dance or crack jokes. He just stood there, talked plainly, and let people stare. His body was the act. He died in 1906 from tuberculosis. For all the talk about his legs and heart, the truth is he was quiet, private, and far more ordinary than the banners made him seem. They paid to see what was wrong. They missed what was human. Number 12. Irma Lustow. Irma didn't pretend to be anything other than what she was. In an era where performers were costumed and repackaged, she walked into the spotlight just as herself, spotted, wild-haired, and quiet. They called her the Panther Woman, sometimes the Leopard Lady. Her legs were marked with dark patches of pigment, and her hair grew in a thick ring around her head like a feline mane. She wasn't trying to play an animal. She simply resembled one more than anyone had seen. Irma was French and never claimed to be from the jungle or the mountains. Promoters tried to build mythology around her, but she rarely spoke during interviews. Her act wasn't about movement or danger. She stood, she turned, she looked the crowd in the eye, and that was enough. There was something dignified in her stillness. People didn't come to see tricks. They came to make sense of her face, and they never really could. That was her power. Number 11. Hugh Bailey. Well, sadly, Hugh Bailey didn't walk upright. He folded. His limbs were twisted from birth, curved and bent in unnatural directions. His body earned him names like Pretzel Man, Spider Boy, and Crawfish Boy, depending on where he was performing. But under all the nicknames was a teenager trying to find comfort inside a shape that rarely let him rest. He moved by crawling, using the strength of his arms to shift the rest of himself forward. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. He appeared in the 1974 horror film The Mutations, playing himself in a setting that blurred fact and fiction. Most of the time, he lived on the fringes of the sideshow circuit. Too real to be a costume, too raw to be ignored. Hugh didn't have a speech or an act. He didn't need one. His very presence forced people to confront their discomfort. In a world obsessed with straight lines and symmetry, he was shaped like a question, and he never answered it. He lived in his own terms. Number 10. Zelma George. Zelma wasn't a performer in the usual sense, but what she could do turned heads in every room she entered. From Canton, Zelma had a talent that bordered on impossible. She could write with both hands at the same time, in opposite directions. Forwards with one, backwards with the other. Upside down, mirrored, reversed. Whatever way you could imagine letters being formed, she could produce it instantly, cleanly, and without hesitation. It wasn't a stunt. It was a fluent, deliberate skill that amazed scholars, performers, and sideshow crowds alike. She didn't claim to be a psychic or a genius. She had simply trained her brain and body to move independently. And she made it look easy. In a world obsessed with what people looked like, Zelma stood out for what she could do. Her handwriting was art, symmetry, and logic dancing across the page. She didn't bend her body like others in the freak shows. She bent language and made it obey. Number 9. J. Fred Muggs. J. Fred wasn't just a chimpanzee, he saved a television network. When the Today Show launched in the 1950s, ratings were flat. Viewers weren't interested. Then came Muggs, dressed in a little suit, sipping from a cup, throwing tantrums or hugs depending on his mood. He sat beside Dave Garroway as a co-host. People tuned in, not because of the news, but because they wanted to see what the chimp would do. Celebrities posed with him. Politicians laughed with him. At one point, he was more recognizable than half the anchors on the network. But Muggs wasn't just a joke. He was unpredictable in a way that made every segment feel alive. After his time on TV, he became a star attraction at Busch Gardens and other parks. He outlived the fame, outlived the executives who hired him, and by the time he retired, he had become one of the most successful non-human performers in history. All without saying a word. Number 8. The Great Farini. William Leonard Hunt didn't care much about staying in one identity. To most, he was the Great Farini, the man who walked a tightrope over Niagara Falls with another person clinging to his back. He didn't invent showmanship, but he pushed it into places it hadn't gone before. He experimented constantly, designing floating shoes, building circus equipment, and even creating what would later become the human cannonball launch system. After a personal tragedy took his wife during a performance, he didn't stop. Instead, he traveled further. He partnered with a young acrobat named Lulu, presenting them as his adopted son, until it was later revealed that Lulu was a woman. Farini never addressed the lie. He didn't have to. He simply moved on to the next reinvention. In between stunts, he wrote books on war, botany, and African deserts. He wasn't trying to be famous. He just didn't know how to stop building things. Whether it was ideas, personas, or entire shows, he never stood still. He was a real legend. Number 7. Charles Porter. Charles Porter was in his 30s when his body began turning against itself. At first, it was just stiffness in his neck, then his back, then his legs. But it didn't stop there. His muscles began hardening. Not from injury or trauma. His tissues were literally turning to bone. He was diagnosed with a rare condition, progressive ossification. The name didn't matter much to Charles. What mattered was that he was slowly losing the ability to move. Bit by bit, his joints locked up. Simple tasks took longer. Sleep got harder. He found work in sideshows under the name The Man Turning to Stone. There was no act. He stood, spoke when he could, and let people ask their questions. Some were curious, some were cruel. But Charles didn't need to exaggerate. His condition spoke for itself. He came from New Haven, Connecticut. But his body didn't belong to any place or plan. He lived inside something solid, and he felt it close in. Number 6. Henri Franconi. Henri wasn't trying to fit into circus tradition. He wanted to stretch it. Alongside his brother, he turned the Cirque Olympique into something bigger than animals and tricks. They added full storylines, scripts, characters, and historical chaos to the stage. One night it might be pirates, the next French soldiers reenacting a battlefield. The horses weren't props. They were central to the action. He wrote and staged much of it himself, blending equestrian skill with storytelling. It wasn't always subtle, but that wasn't the point. The audience came to feel overwhelmed, surprised, and moved, not just entertained. The critics had opinions, but the crowds kept coming. What made him stand out wasn't just scale, it was the fact that he took performance seriously. He didn't see the circus as a novelty. He saw it as a living, moving art form. By the time he died, he'd helped shape the way European circuses presented drama, not as filler, but as the main event. Number 5. Caroline Crachami. Caroline Crachami barely lived long enough to make sense of the world around her. From the moment she was born, everything about her body puzzled the people around her. She was unusually small, so small that adults could lift her with one hand. She didn't grow the way other children did, but instead of protecting her, the people in charge of her saw money. She was taken to England and displayed under names like the Sicilian fairy, while a crowd of strangers paid to stare. Doctors examined her. Guests tried to feed her. Nobody asked if she was tired. During one of her appearances, she collapsed. Her health had been fragile the entire time, and her body finally gave out. She died not long after, and instead of letting her rest, the exhibitions continued. Only now it was her remains on display. She was talked about in lectures and books, as if she'd been an object. No one asked how scared she must have been. Now let's head over to Number 4. Robert Wadlow. Robert was a quiet, gentle man with a body that didn't listen. As a toddler, he grew fast. By age 10, he towered over adults. By his early 20s, he reached 9 feet, 1 inch, the tallest man ever recorded. He never tried to perform, but the world insisted. He joined Ringling Brothers for a time, and later toured the U.S. with a shoe company that made his custom-sized boots. People lined up to meet him, shake his enormous hand, and ask him what it felt like to live inside a body that large. He rarely complained. But it wasn't easy. The braces that helped him walk rubbed raw against his legs. One caused a small wound that turned into a deadly infection. He died in 1940, just 22 years old. At his funeral, it took 12 pallbearers to carry his casket. Robert never asked to be famous. He just kept growing, and the world never stopped staring. Number 3. The Equestrian Aerialist. S. Bannister grew up in the kind of family where performance wasn't a dream, it was the job. Her father, James Bannister, ran an equestrian show long before the word circus meant what it does now. From a young age, she learned how to command a horse with precision and walk a tightrope without panic, often performing both in the same show. By her late teens, she was appearing regularly across Scotland and England, finally becoming one of the headlining acts at Astley's Amphitheatre in London. That was the closest thing to Broadway for a rider. Audiences didn't cheer for her costumes or backstory. They were stunned by what she could do. Her movements had control and quiet focus. Her sister Mary later joined her, trained in the same way but married and retired earlier. S didn't chase fame, and her name slowly vanished from the posters. But every woman in the circus who came after her was walking through a door she opened. Number 2. Elvira Guerra. Elvira Guerra knew how to ride long before anyone cared who she was. Her father was a circus performer, and she was raised in that world, not in the spotlight, but in the dust and repetition of rehearsals. She didn't need glamour. She needed focus. Her riding wasn't flashy or full of tricks. It was sharp, controlled, and clean. In a time when women were rarely allowed center ring, she built her own venue in Bordeaux. She booked herself. She designed her acts. She didn't wait for permission. In 1900, she took part in a riding exhibition during the Paris Exposition. No gold medals, no headlines. But she quietly became the first Italian woman to participate in Olympic events. No press releases, just grit. After that, she kept performing for a while, then disappeared from public view. She died in Marseille decades later, away from the crowd. No one wrote long eulogies. But every woman who ever rode into the ring owed her something. Number 1. Pablo Fanke. Everyone knows the name thanks to John Lennon and that surreal Beatles track, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. But what most people miss is that Pablo Fanke wasn't just a quirky poster name. He was absolutely real. Born William Darby, he became one of Victorian Britain's top circus showmen. Skilled in horseback acrobatics, management, and performance, Fanke shattered barriers, not just in talent, but in race. A person of color running major circus operations in 19th century England was unheard of. Some traced his ancestry to Africa, others to India, but he rose up under William Batty, one of the era's biggest circus figures. Eventually, he launched his own shows, ran full-time circus theaters, and led some of the most popular acts across Britain. For over 30 years, his name meant success in the ring. Fanke died in 1871, long before Lennon found that famous poster. But by then, he had already carved out a name the hard way and made history doing it. We hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you in the next one.